Hey guys! So in this video, I'll be showing you all the steps that I took to make this wig. It was my first time trying to do anything like this before, and it was quite the challenge, but I'm very happy to say that I technically did it. It could be better, and I definitely made some mistakes, but that's okay. Speaking of mistakes, this is not a tutorial, and I definitely didn't know what I was doing for most of this. So if you would like to know exactly how to make a wig, if you'd like to see very good tutorials from some amazingly talented people, then check the description for some videos that I learned from on how to make a wig. But otherwise, if you just want to see what I did for my first time making a wig, then just keep watching. So for this, I used a lace frontal and 3 bundles of Brazilian straight human hair from the site called Unice. They were the sponsor of my date night get ready with me video, and they did provide the materials to make this wig for me for free, but they're not sponsoring this video. I'm just making this for fun as an extra because I think the process is cool and because I asked you guys in the get ready with me if you'd want to see it, and I saw at least 3 comments that said yes, so that was enough of an excuse for me to make this video. But how did I turn all of this into this? So my first step was to bleach the knots, or to attempt to bleach the knots. So if you're not familiar, lace frontals are made by tying hair through like the holes of the lace and tying knots, and the knots are visible and it can make your wig look really unnatural. It's a giveaway that something is fake hair, so in order to kind of make those go away, we bleach them. This is definitely one of the hardest steps for me. I was so nervous to do this because if you over bleach, then you can bleach the roots of the hair, and then all of a sudden you might have yellow or even blonde roots of your hair. Or if you under bleach, then you still see the knots, and then you just wasted all of that time and energy and effort for nothing. Of course, you can fix both of those problems if they happen. If you under bleach, you just bleach again. If you over bleach, then you can dye the roots, but it's just extra work, extra effort, so it's best to try to do it right the first time. So to prep the frontal, I brushed all of the hair back away from the lace and got it wet to try to prevent the hair itself getting bleached as opposed to the knots. There's a lot of random hairs that love to stick out and don't go where they're supposed to go, and so this really helps keep all of the hair together and away from the area where I'm gonna put a bunch of bleach over. So now that the frontal is prepped, we're ready to try to bleach the knots. As we saw earlier, I tried to get the consistency of the bleach to be kind of like a thick cake batter. You don't want it to be too thin so that it starts to seep down into the rest of the hair. You also don't want it to be too thick so that it doesn't actually penetrate and bleach the knots like we want it to. Unfortunately, I think that my mixture was a little bit too thick. I think it stayed a little bit too on top of the lace and the knots to fully bleach them, as you'll see later. But I tried my best, and I'd honestly would rather under bleach than over bleach, just since it's easier to fix under bleaching, I think. But either way, I just did one pass of trying to bleach the knots because I figured it was my first wig and I didn't want to put in too much time and effort into something, and I also didn't want to ruin anything. I didn't want to fuck up the frontal, so I just kind of did one attempt and then left it at that. This is where I'll again mention that in the description I have a lot of amazing tutorials on how to do these steps, including ones that are specifically on how to bleach knots and how not to over bleach, not to under bleach, all that jazz, just since I really didn't have any sort of technique I should share with you here. And if you want to know exactly how to do it, exactly what I'm trying to do, then there are other better videos out there for that. But now that the bleach is applied, I covered the frontal with some foil and I let it sit for I think about 15, maybe 20 minutes. I think in total. I would check it every 10 minutes to see how it was doing, and it was honestly really hard to tell how the bleach was processing and if the knots were turning any sort of shade. But once I thought they turned a little bit yellow, that's when I took the frontal out and rinsed it and then washed out the bleach. To wash it, I used a purple shampoo just to try to cancel out any yellow or brassy tones. I actually let the shampoo sit on the frontal for about 10 to 15 minutes to really try to cancel out any yellowness if there was any. Then I rinsed the shampoo out, added some conditioner, let that hang out for a few minutes, rinse that out again, and then let the frontal air dry. Okay, but what were the results of me trying to bleach the knots? Well, as I kind of talked about earlier, not the best ever. I would say it was slightly successful, mildly successful. It was definitely good enough for me, fell under that category. So there's definitely some blonde knots here, as you can see, but when I flip it over to the other side, that's when you can see that not all of the knots got bleached all the way through. I would say that it was better at the hairline, which kind of makes sense because the knots are generally like thinner there. The hair isn't as dense. This hairline was pre-plucked and everything. So it makes sense why the knots got bleached there, but the further back you went, that's when you could see that there are definitely still some little tiny black dots, but that's okay. So overall, I would probably give it a solid D, maybe a C- for bleaching the knots. But like I said, it's my first attempt, and I also just wanted to start making the wig, so at this point I figured I would just leave it how it was, and I can always use foundation on it to hide the knots if I wanted. So yeah, that was the first step of making this wig. Next up is actually assembling the wig, and so for this I needed a wig cap, and so I went to a local hair supply store and just asked for one that you would use for making a wig, and this is the one that I got. And so first I'm going to sew the lace frontal to the wig cap, and to measure it to my head and to place it down is a little hard for me to explain, and I didn't film that process. So again, I'm gonna remind you guys of the tutorials in the description, but just for this step, know that I measured and tried to place with the wig cap and the frontal where it would lie on my head and like where I would want the wig to sit, if that makes any sense at all. Hopefully it does, just because that's all you're gonna get for that step. But using a needle and thread that I bought along with the wig cap, I will be sewing the lace frontal to the wig cap. How many times can I say wig cap in this video? So starting at one end, I sewed the frontal down as tightly and neatly as I could manage, all the way up and over to the other end of the wig cap. So this is how it's looking with the lace frontal sewn down, and next up we'll be applying the rest of the hair, or the bundles. For this I used one 14-inch bundle and two 16-inch bundles, and the frontal itself was also 14 inches. So to sew the bundles onto the wig cap, I started at the bottom and I used the longest one first, which was one of the 16-inch bundles. So first I attached one end of the bundle to one end of the frontal, just to get it at the correct placement so that I could pin the rest down with T-pins. Then I start sewing it down again as tightly and neatly as possible. As you can see, I'm just doing one layer of the bundle. I know that some people do too, but I was going off a recommendation from a patron not to double up just because it can give too much volume, and so I played it safe and just did one layer. Then, once I reached the other end of the frontal, I folded it over and I kept sewing the next track. And so I just continued sewing and sewing and sewing all the hair down until I got to about this part of the wig. And from this part, instead of continuing to fold over, it was getting a little bit tricky for me to place the tracks down, so this is where I started to just cut them to size and sew them down that way. And so here is the final section done. The sewing is complete. It felt like it took a lifetime to sew all of that hair to this wig, but it's looking good, it's looking like a wig, and so we just have a few more steps to go. So next I cut out the part of the lace cap that was underneath the lace frontal, since we don't want the cap to poke through where the frontal is, of course. And so this is how it looked trying it on the first time. I was like 50-50 relieved and disappointed because, you know, it fit on my head. It does look like a wig, but it is a little bit too big. So, whoops. But to try to get it to fit my head a little bit better, I'm going to sew an elastic band in the back. And so I know that traditionally the elastic band that people will use for these will be black or will even be part of the wig cap that they had cut off, but this is what I had on hand, and I kind of figured that, you know, if it didn't work, then at least I didn't, you know, go out and buy special elastic band to fit a wig that ended up not working anyway. So that's what I did. And so it's feeling and looking better now that I have the elastic in the back. So next what I'm gonna do is cut off this lace, because the lace is also, it's very distracting. So now it's looking a lot better, looking more like a wig, but as you can see, it's still a little bit big. The lace lifts off of my forehead a little bit, but from far away, it's pretty okay, but you can tell that it's not completely flat and snug against my head, which was a little bit disappointing and frustrating, but it could be worse. I was thinking that if I glued it down, it might look better, or maybe if I even took these sections and like sewed it to the back somehow, that might help, but I didn't want to get too like creative with it, if that makes sense. So I just left it alone. And so now that the wig is made, the next steps that I did is I shampooed and conditioned it. This helped to get all the hair kind of in place after it had been sewn down, if that makes sense, and cleaned it, of course. And so next I'm going to be applying my trusty argan hair oil. Argan oil? Hair argan oil. Whatever. Then I parted the hair how I wanted and combed it all smooth. Then I added some of this leave-in spray, mainly for the thermal protection against this hairdryer. I decided to blow dry to better help the hair go where I wanted it to, and so that it could all blend together nicely. I threw it back on to check how it was looking, and already it's looking a little bit better, I think. But I also wanted to finish drying it while I was wearing it, because it was a bit easier to control that way. I'm way more used to drying hair on my head than on somebody else's, or a mannequin head's. So now the wig is all nice and dry and extra fluffy, so the very last step is to style it. So I decided to curl the wig, and what I'm going to do for each section is spray it down with a heat protectant spray. Then I'll split the section into 2-inch pieces, curl all of those with the 32mm barrel, and spray the whole section with hairspray when I'm finished. So I'm gonna shut up for a bit and I'll check back in when it's done. Okay, so the wig is all curled, and I think the extra volume is helping to hide the size issue. But I am pretty satisfied with the curls, although I did end up piecing them out later. Then the final thing that I did is I trimmed the lace just a little bit more, but it still doesn't change the fact that the wig is too big. As you can see, my finger fits underneath the lace doesn't sit on my forehead, but that's okay. I don't really mind. And besides, from far away, you can't really tell. Plus, this was my very first time trying to make a wig, so the fact that it's wearable at all is good enough for me. Alright, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!